Now we're very happy to welcome the Reverend Robert Yarnell.
Thank you. Making sure I'm unmuted. Good. How wonderful to be here with you all again. I think it's been a few months, and always wonderful to share silence with you. It's funny, I have some of the same struggle that I think Mary articulated so beautifully today. And in fact, when Joseph mentioned that this month's theme is power, I immediately had the image of flexing a muscle. So even I, given the talk I'm writing today and delivering, immediately thought of that, of kind of a bodily power, as opposed to something else. And maybe that's appropriate because it is, after all, Super Bowl Sunday, which is a, you could say, classically male occasion, where we see one kind of power on display. They fight on the field until one team of men emerges victorious. Any tie leading to sudden death overtime. Some of the fans even wear war paint, and I think you know the drill. You can see that later. But today, as a kind of counter programming, if you will, I want to talk about another kind of power too often ignored in our world. And it's what I call the power of the divine feminine. Now, what is feminine? Well, ultimately, it's what we say it is, what we believe, because it's a construct, as most of what we consider gender is. So we have assigned certain qualities to feminine, and then we've decided men can be this way, women can be that, and never the twain shall meet. And these gender roles really confine us all. This culture seems to disown the feminine. It's our shadow, if you will. You think of the way we talk about chick flicks, girl stuff. Even musicals are derided. Anything having to do with love, well, that's tomorrow, that's Valentine's Day. That's frilly nonsense to some men and to whole parts of our culture. This time of year, around football season, you often hear a rather tragic philosophy. Winning isn't the most important thing, it's the only thing. Wow. Think about what that means for each of us and for humanity, if winning is the only thing. So this straitjacket of narrow masculinity locks us in and limits our lives in huge ways. Now, there are plenty of theories out there about how we got here. Eckhart Tolle in A New Earth has what I think is a fascinating perspective. What is it, he asks, that suddenly made men feel threatened by the female? The evolving ego in them. It knew it could gain full control of our planet only through the male form. And to do so, it had to render the female powerless. Yikes. Patriarchal hierarchies emerged within our culture, and ideas were forged within us and secured in place through religion and fear. Now, in truth, of course, religion and spirituality appear to be both the cause and the cure of this anti-feminine mindset. The cause, I think, is easily spotted in religion. If we look at the male-dominated structures, some of the things we hear about Adam and Eve and how she was bad and brought us into original sin. I could go on with examples like that, and I think we know those, but I think the cure, if you will, is there too. But it's often ignored. If we look at just the message, the central message of Jesus is so often not even seen. It doesn't register. Love. Turn the other cheek. Give up possessions. All too often today, Christianity seems angry or officious, anything but truly loving, generous. Too often it's telling people how awful they are through concepts like original sin. The radical, divine, feminine aspect of Jesus's teaching tragically vanishes, invisible to this kind of masculinity and its need to judge, control, dominate. Or if this other thing is seen, anything seeming feminine is dismissed as lovey-dovey nonsense. It's really not the point. And then we shift to something very different. Now, of course, Jesus lived in and responded to a hierarchical, violent, radically male-dominated culture as well. And yet, it seems he broke through. People hungered for his message, enough that he became a threat, apparently. So how did his message find such an audience? Well, let's remember that he spoke largely to a Jewish crowd, being himself Jewish and well-versed in the scriptures. And the Hebrew Bible, what some call the Old Testament, contains many strong women: Ruth, Naomi, Esther. The book of Psalms contains joy, sorrow, exuberance, and love. It's not all about an angry God. Look at Proverbs 8, where wisdom is celebrated as a woman present at creation. So there were certainly echoes he could allude to. And yet, Leonard Schlein in The Alphabet versus the Goddess offers this astonishing perspective. Quote, "The first commandment, I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt have no other gods before me, announces the disappearance of the goddess. The meta message of the commandment is, I am the only deity, I am a man, and I do not have, nor do I need, a wife or consort. While it is never explicitly stated in the Old Testament that Yahweh is male, all Yahweh's titles, Lord, Host, King, Ruler, and Master, are indisputably masculine. The first commandment declares that Yahweh will not tolerate mention of a goddess. Given that the Hebrews and Moses emerged from Egypt, the most goddess-worshiping culture in the ancient world, the first commandment represented a sharp rupture with the past. And given that we acknowledge that life is a conjoining of masculine and feminine principles, the exclusion of any feminine presence from the first commandment makes it the most radical sentence ever written." End quote. So Leonard Schlein speaks in this book about men's tendency to favor the left brain and lean toward dominance over women, to prefer logic and words to beauty and images, to favor time over timelessness, and obedience over cooperation. With all of that in mind, reconsider the first 5 commandments. Commandment 1, God's a man, no goddess. 2, no images. 3, focus on your words. 4, structure time. 5, obey your parents. So we have a kind of masculine coup in 5 commandments. God's a man, no images, focus on words and time, and obey authority. And did you ever wonder why perhaps those 5 are first before we even get to murder? It's like there's some kind of infrastructure being laid in place. And let me be absolutely clear, I think the commandments in themselves are great, and they laid an important moral structure for our culture in many ways, and there are metaphysical readings of these that are quite beautiful. But we have to see that there's also something that appears to be under there, or at least consider that possibility, that femininity is somehow dangerous to parts of the male psyche, as Eckhart Tolle articulated. Look at how transgender women are attacked, murdered at a disturbing rate. The notion that a man would become a woman, there'd be feminine within someone, disturbs part of the psyche so much. And of course, let me be clear, I love masculinity, but cut off from the balancing energy of femininity, we get knowledge without wisdom, strength without justice, leadership without compassion or empathy. So my point is, of course, not to disparage the masculine, it's to encourage us all to reclaim the feminine because doing so is key to our well-being individually and collectively, I think. Jesus sought to integrate women back into the community. In fact, women played a key role in hosting him and following him and literally supporting him, not just supporting his message, they tithed to him. Listen to this, Luke 8, verse 3. This is the Passion Translation. Many other women who supported Jesus's ministry from their own personal finances also traveled with him. Well, now that's an interesting aside. So his message resonated with women. They literally valued his message, not just because he let them hang around, but because he used his authority as a man to bring back feminine qualities like love, listening, and nonviolence, to name just a few. And he consistently challenged the status quo, the culture that dominated, devalued, and shamed women. The most famous example being when he stepped into the circle and stopped a group of men from stoning a woman simply by asking them that question or saying that statement, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." Basically using his male privilege, if you will, for the benefit of women. Now, throughout all of this, perhaps you're saying, I'm not Jesus, what can I do? Which is always a good question. How do we reintegrate the feminine? Well, consider that enemies are not just outside of us. Things we disown, unconsciously judge in ourselves, are enemies of a sort. So loving our enemies is not always easy. It will be, and maybe even should be, uncomfortable. We can invite feminine energy to emerge or to announce its presence with ever greater certainty. If you want to apologize for having an emotion, stop, breathe. Just have the emotion and let people judge if they want. We can own it. Sometimes lately when I'm giving a talk or elsewhere, I try to really practice just letting tears come down my face if they emerge and not wipe them away and certainly not apologize. And that takes some getting used to. I try to be curious about what I'm disowning or judging in myself. We can be curious about what we apologize for in ourselves. One by one, I believe we can move beyond the limited thinking of our collective past and create the beloved community that Dr. King envisioned, the one Paul alludes to with, "There is neither Jew nor Gentile, man nor woman in Christ." In other words, true equality. We can challenge anti-feminine language, jokes, assumptions, push back in whatever way we can, be the change, ever evolving, risking discomfort for the greater good. I used to not be willing to wear a pink shirt or something like this. I've changed and continue to try to push against internal messages that certain things are wrong because they might be feminine. Catching that unconscious thought. We can give permission by being an example of something more in the world. The way that a few brave straight men showed you could have a gay friend back when it was socially and sometimes physically dangerous to do so. We can show a new way. Women, you are given so many messages of self-doubt. You can help us all by loving yourself as you are, celebrating your daughters and friends, ultimately loving the fullness of you, however that looks beyond labels. Let's all turn our cheerleading energy toward you today. Men, it may seem like we're giving up power as we come into balance, taking off our uniforms and helmets, talking about feelings instead of making things happen, cooperating rather than dominating and winning. We'll be weak, is what the masculine culture and brain sometimes tell us. But I think actually that will gain power in joy, emotions of all kinds, in love, compassion, vitality, and the fullness of life. Things that can't be measured, but ironically, I would say the only ones that count. So if we banished the goddess long ago, then let's reclaim her as our friend, our mentor, our inspiration. Let's remember that God is beyond gender because God is all of us. God is all of us watching this, and also God is all that is within us. God is all of us. And certainly that's the God I want to proclaim and demonstrate, a big, loving, all-embracing, feminine, masculine, gender fluid God. Now consider this. Because of the trans community, the word they is now officially recognized in the dictionary as both a plural and a singular gender-neutral pronoun. Well, we are individuations of the one God, the many as one. So maybe God is not so much a he or she, but rather in the modern vernacular, they. Certainly God is here now. May they bless you with the abundance and fullness of life. Thank you.